All right, guys, let's start. Souls who came to a public meeting on a Friday night. I was told we would not have anybody here, but you all are like us. We're planning nerds. We love what we do. We love your town. You want to see amazing things happen. So I'm going to try to get through this fast because I know it is Friday night. I want to respect all your time. I see a lot of familiar faces. We've been doing this all week. So this is the culmination. You've seen a lot of this, but it's more polished and there's going to be a narrative to it. So you know who we are now, I think, after this week. And I am trying to get the next slide. Okay.
Tell us who you are again.
I'm Tony Garcia. I'm principal of Street Plans, and we are your urban planners for the mobility plan, your growth and conservation plan, a town center master plan, and a new code that is going to help you do all of this stuff. So this was all about doing your mobility plan, or at least getting it started. There's a lot of questions that we asked and you answered. There's a lot more that we untangled during this week that we're not going to answer, right? This is 1 week is not nearly enough time to get to the heart of what your town is about. But we did a lot during this week. We're doing the work in progress presentation, where we show you how we polished some of the things that you saw on Wednesday, for those of you who were here on Wednesday. We had our kickoff workshop. A lot of you were there in this room, giving us your ideas. And then we had a lot of stakeholder meetings during the week with folks like Georgia DOT, with your tree commission, planning commission, other stakeholders, developers around town, all the people who are going to need to be in on implementing these plans. And that helps inform our work. The reason we do this format, studio format, is so that we can have those meetings at the same time as we're drawing. So you saw during the week my staff here drawing at the same, and me too, at the same time as we were having meetings, listening to what was being said and incorporating that into our plans. We did our visual preference survey, and this is going to come up again and again. There were clear preferences. This is not new to us. We go to places all around the country, and this is the pattern. There are certain things that we gravitate towards, like trees and beautiful streets, and other things that we don't, despite the fact that this is our lived experience, a lot of people's lived experience, including my own, which is suburbia. And so what did we hear? People are driving too fast on CV Street. People are driving too fast on Highland. I love Main Street. More Main Street. I want to take my golf cart from Ivory Ridge to Publix, but I can't. Freight trucks are driving around downtown, and they really shouldn't be. How do we solve some of these problems? So the way that we interpreted those comments, and there was a lot of comments that were very similar and a lot that were different. How do we make it easy to safely walk and bike around town and cart? And around town? How do we slow traffic? More so. We're going to stand still at certain times of the day, and other people feel like we need to slow cars even more. And then how do we code for that? How do we actually design these streets? Because these are great ideas. This is a lot of words, right? But this plan. Number two is establishing types of situations so you're not negotiating every single normal, everyday residential and commercial streets. And then how do you do your signature streets? You saw that beautiful drawing that Vanessa took 2 days to draw by hand, called Propose and Dispose. Let's draw it. That's a terrible idea, or that's a really good idea. Let's move it on to the next stage. At this stage, we're just throwing things out and seeing if they stick, both technically and also politically, right? And then finally, what is your 100-day action plan? What are the things that you can do in the next year before? What does that look like? This is your existing network of trails and sidewalks. It's pretty anemic. You've done a lot. I mean, I don't want to be harsh about it, but there are a lot of gaps here, right? So how do we start to connect those gaps? And how do we, I think this is a noble goal, how do we put everybody in town within a 5-minute walk of a path? A 5-minute walk is a quarter of a mile. It is a normal distance that anybody is willing to walk. Any able person is willing to walk. There are other distances like a half mile and a mile that if you're adventurous, you can spend 10 or 20 minutes walking. But for your everyday stuff, this is a normal amount of time. So how do we do that? We establish path and trail types. I'm going to get academic here because I think there's some foundational principles that you need to understand about the way that we do this work that bring clarity to the structure of this project and the other components of the project. This is it's called the natural habitat transect, and it was something coined early on in the 20th century and late 19th century that described ecosystems and the different species that live in different ecosystems. So like, you know, where do the cabbage palms live and where do the oak trees live and where do the pines live? They don't all live together. It depends on soils and hydrology, right? Everybody's got their, that there are similar categories for, there's the urban big city, and then there's every single range all the way to rural. And sometimes we get caught up in certain types, and that's the type everywhere. And really what we should be doing is taking a more nuanced approach in how we use these human habitat tools and how we code for them. And so the zoning code eventually will be divided in a way that provides predictability in what the outcome should be. Not being reactive, but being proactive about what you want to see as it relates to how we live. And really, this end of the spectrum doesn't even apply to you. This is your standard, right? You're T3 to T5. You're small town and suburbs, all the way to rural. And, you know, social scientists and biologists have been talking about this for 100 years. Patrick Geddes was a Scottish biologist and urban planner that first made the connection between natural ecosystems and where we live and how we live. And really, you can create a transect out of anything, tools and, you know, any number of things. So let's create a transect of trail types that range from the most off-road dedicated path, that is cart paths and bike paths, to ones that are less protected, let's say, or less separated. They're parallel to the roadway, new paths or improving existing paths. And this spectrum also includes, you know, going from something that's fully hardscape, you know, asphalt or concrete, to something softer, right? All the way to going fully in the street. So your slow streets in the middle of town, where you're not going to put a path on every street in town. Is it practical? It's not necessary. Especially if you dramatically lower your speed limits, people should be able to share the streets in town. Similarly, with pedestrian infrastructure, you've got sidewalks that should be more formal and hardscape, all the way to nature trails. You have semi-public, private spaces like the space in the courtyard on Main Street, and then paths between houses in neighborhoods. This is from Seaside, Florida. It's called a clear walk. It's a little 5-foot path between houses to get from one block to another, where we have long blocks, all the way to your nature trail. So I'm gonna show you large pictures. So those pictures were just to give you a sense of the range. We've got like 12 different types. And within that, there's a lot more that needs to be detailed out, but that's the broad framework. So your existing conditions, you've got 4.6 miles of trails. That is a loose definition of asphalt on the side of the road, or a striped path that's just there, ambiguous who's using it or why or how, but it's okay. We're gonna call it a trail. That's your existing network. The first easy thing to identify are what are the riparian routes, so those routes along waterways where you can't build anything, but you can have some sort of a nature trail adjacent, or utility easements. That could be a Georgia Power, it could be your train tracks, and I'm going to explain how that all works. All of these together, without even, this is just basically north of Highway 16, without going south of Highway 16, you've got 26.8 miles right there. What do these look like? They're rails to trails projects, that's when a rail corridor is abandoned, or rails with trails. There are many trails in the United States that are still active or dormant, where the railroad does not want to give up its rights, but you still keep some access and you negotiate access for some type of a bike ped path. Here's a utility easement under some sort of a power line, and then here's right next to a creek. So these are, I think, core projects to negotiate. These are longer term, but they form a really good beginning of your network. And they're fully off-road. They're not shared with anybody. The only time you have to worry is when you cross over at an intersection. Then you've got your trails along roadways. These are your county and state roads and city roads as they come into town. You'll notice that some of them kind of stop close to town. That's because closer to town, you want to be in a slower speed environment on street. And also your right-of-ways get much tighter. That's 18 miles. This is what they could look like. These are different examples from around the country. In Indianapolis, this is the Monet Trail in Carmel. Beautiful pavers, bioretention, and you can imagine these on county roads. The state highways are going to be tougher. Those are going to look probably more utilitarian, but I think you can get from the state highway system and run with it, especially on roads that you control. Then there's this category of projects that we're going to show you more about later, which are those roads in town, like CV Street, like Main Street as it approaches town, where you've got a really wide right-of-way that was striped with that line that just hangs out there that isn't marked in any meaningful way, and Pilot Street. So there's stuff to do on these. You can imagine something like this on Main Street at Rockwell. Put a nice border, expand the pavement. I'm going to show you more about this. And then slow streets. These are neighborhood streets within subdivisions or within town, or core town streets, where you just want people going slow. People should not be going fast in these streets. You should feel comfortable as a bicyclist or as a golf cart rider to ride in the middle of the street. And some of the ways that you can actually accomplish this is aggressive speed reduction and traffic calming. This is a community conversation. You want to do these types of things on your neighborhood streets. This could be Highland Street, between, let's say, CV and College, where you take paths at certain locations. This would also reduce the amount of truck cut-throughs. This is atypical. You do this in very specialized instances, but also just pavement markings. Is there a policy that you would advocate for at the citywide level for a very low speed limit in town? 20 is playing networks. Those separated paths. Here are your existing paths in town, your county roads and here. There's something happening here. We need to dive deeper into there. But once you start to figure that out, you've got almost 60 miles of paths and trails and streets around town that you can bike and park on. And you start to see a loop that everybody within the loop is, within a quarter mile of some way of getting around town. And then there's another loop growing around here on the outskirts. So this is big idea number one. Big idea number two is you're coding for great streets. This is going to be a little bit more of a academic lesson. Remember this activity, right? So your code requires these streets. That wasn't an accident, right? You all really self-selected here. And maybe this group self-selected, or the group on Monday at the workshop, are the people who care about streets. So they came out here and they have a certain value system. That may be. But this is a standard thing for people of all different stripes. But your code doesn't actually allow for these. Your code requires wider streets. It doesn't really allow or require street trees right now. Or a lot of the different types of things that you see in those photos that you really like, both in commercial and in residential areas. So going back to our transect, it's really all about context. What is the right tool for that specific area of town and planning for that? Remember, this is not your jam, right? You're not downtown anywhere. You're a town and neighborhoods. And so what are the streets that belong in town and in your neighborhoods? So there's a couple of things that I have to explain. They are intuitive to you once you see them. The two components of a great street are the building frontage How does the building face the street? Whether it's a residential, suburban building, or your main street buildings. What is the distance between the building and the street? And is this building and sidewalk? Is there a landscape strip? And what does the frontage look like? Is there something comfortable to walk in front of? Do people like to walk along Highway 16 where the Dollar General is? If there were a sidewalk there? No, because there's nothing to walk next to, and you're next to the highway, even though you're really kind of far away. So active frontage, and your code requires it, but in doing code review for development applications, it's not working as intended, right? You require a lot of fenestration to create active storefront for a building that's set back from the street 200 feet. Nobody's walking next to that gas station. Why would you need 100% fenestration on that building? And then there's street detailing. What does the horizontal surface of the street look like? How, where does the right-of-way start? How do the lanes look? And where are street trees and sidewalks? How narrow is the street? I'm going to go back to this. This is a core value of ours. In our code and everything that you see us do, our streets need to be narrow for them to be walkable, for them to be livable, for you to get the character that you're looking for. Because geometry, it has to do with the relationship of the height of the buildings to condition. 2 to 3 story buildings. The reason Main Street works is because it has a ratio between the width and the height of the buildings that makes you feel like you're in a place to gather and not a place to move through. Like Highway 16, and we're going to show you pictures. If you have to put buildings on Highway 16, for you to feel that sense, they've got to be really tall because your right of way is 150 feet. And that's great for the Champs-Élysées in Paris, but you're not that. You don't want to be that, right? So right-of-way widths are tough, right? There's a general traffic engineering nomenclature, your arterials, your highways, and your local streets. That's how engineers think about including here in your region and anywhere else in the world. You got roads, rural roads, pastoral roads, streets, alleys, avenues, some of these big time rural roads. There's ways of doing that in small. It's a different context. Those buildings are never going to be tall enough to justify 100-foot right-of-way or 70-foot right-of-way, which is why your divisions, there's no sense of there. So what happens? In your neighborhood, you want 40 to 50 right-of-way widths maximum. This is the maximum for a 2-story building, presumably. In your neighborhood streets, you're going to have a landscape strip. You don't have tree walls, right? That's a different context. In your town center, you have sidewalks with a tree wall. You can put a landscape strip in the downtown. I'm explaining some of this stuff. I know it seems intuitive in this, so in code for this stuff in this zone. And you can have on-street parking in neighborhoods and on-street parking in town center, or not. So here are different types of streets, right? These are in Devonsville. This is in Baldwin Park in Florida. You can see narrow streets, buildings close to the sidewalk, residential roads, and then Main Street conditions. So let's talk about that second piece of street design, which is the building frontage. How do we code that? How do we determine what does that look like? And not make those decisions on a case-by-case basis the way that you're doing right now. Every time a development application comes for Highway 16, you have to figure out, well, where does everything go? And it doesn't have to be that random or negotiated piecemeal. You lay it out in the code, you figure out where your utilities are ahead of time, and you say where everything should go. This is a typical code sheet, and it says what zone everything should be on. It's tied to different street types, and you're going to have a few conditions for Highway 16 and Highway 85. Those are your most complex streets because of the state, right? Because they're state right away, and because that's where your major utilities come into town. One question that I have that remains a big question mark in my head, I did not hear a lot of people talk about it here, is what does the buffer look like for you all? Do you care about that look on the major roads into town, the way that we see in Peachtree City, where there is a buffer along the main road? Where you feel like you're still in the country, even though there's a subdivision back there and a golf cart path. Where should that occur? Should that continue to occur? And we can continue to talk about that. Let that, see that and noodle on it so that we can continue to talk about it. Because we need to code for it. And I don't have an answer for that right now. I know that everywhere is not urban. Everywhere cannot be an urban condition. So what does Highway 16 look like when we're talking about frontage? Because this is where those, and why they're going to be very different. A small building facing 150 feet worth of right of way, which doesn't even start until out here. But we're starting to try to normalize it and make it typical. So you've got some type of a cart path and some amenity zone slash sidewalk. And then you've got some urban frontage. Here's that section. You're starting to see here. But what happens when you've got a little bit more urban in Winter Park? And what it is imagine this is Highway 16, and you've got landscape strips on either side, very large swales, and then you've got a path of some type, and an access across from Merrimack Lake. That's an application that has been talked about and is already in the work. How do you address this and have some sort of urban frontage that is an amenity for everyone? And it looks like this at the ground level with a much cleaner resolution. So this is also in Carmel, in Indiana, a slip lane that you use for local things. So you're not coming in and off the highway. Some height of building here, on-street parking, and then a row of a cart path and a pedestrian path with street trees. And then you get the developer to pay for this infrastructure that everybody's going to be able to use. So here's that spot. It's going to be scary for some people. This is a Highway 16 across from Merrimack Lake, the 141 property that is currently making its way around the state approval process. This is what it looks like now. And that's what it may look like with this type of multi-way boulevard concept. Some type of height of buildings. This may or may not happen, but the point is that you have to plan for a couple of different variations, especially on Highway 16 and Highway 81. So when you put it all together, what will it really look like? There'll be sheets like this that anybody will be able to pick up. Any of you who want to be developers like Scott and go design new streets. And they'll have all the relevant dimensions, and it'll be easy for staff to understand and implement. You shouldn't have to make a lot of variances or deviations from this. You'll have standard right-of-way widths, dimensions for sidewalks, street trees on every single street. There should not be any street except for alleys where you don't have street trees as a standard rule. That is inconceivable to me if I ever have. Lane widths of 10 feet. You do not need lane widths of 12 feet. You should not have anything larger than a 20-foot curb-to-curb dimension. These are safe streets. Minimal curb-to-curb dimension, variety of curb types, and this will have on-street parking standards. And remember, every single foot that you add to your right-of-ways makes them less safe. This is a public safety issue as much as an aesthetic issue. Okay, so that was the boring technical stuff. Now's the fun stuff. Let's talk about your signature streets. Let's talk about Main Street and Broad Street and how you take what has already been done that's amazing and take it to the next level. Again, there was a reason for this activity. You guys walked right into it. It's great. Okay. No ambiguity about some of the great streets. Some ambiguity about Charrette. Not surprised there, but you know, these historic places are very, very practical. People are looking at and seeing, and their value systems are coming through. So what are your signature streets and how can we improve them? They're Broad and Main Street, and maybe there are others, and that's a question that I have for you all. How can we improve the character of the entrance to town? This is one of your entrances to town, I acknowledge that, but this is one of your main entrances. The first 10 times I came to town were all along this highway. And right now you don't know nobody can tell that you've got this amazing Main Street, right? Nobody can tell because you've got a parking lot, a gas station, an empty lot, and a parking lot here. So how can you draw people in? What does that look like? What happens at this gateway? How can you continue to make Main Street better? How do you leverage the amazing, nuanced, beautiful spaces that come in and out of Main Street? So Broad Street, again, remember I said propose and dispose. We said, well, let's think about it. What can we put there? Maybe we put a dedicated cart path on Broad Street for people coming into town. I mean, does that make sense? given all the things I just said publicly now. Do we keep that center median? Urbanistically, it's super elegant, but there's technical reasons why you would want to do that. You keep that center median, there's no way to move your power lines. That to me is a core thing that you do as a town. You don't have power lines on your main street. This is part of your main street. Let's say Wall Street is main street. Anything that you need to do to get that power line off and buried, you do it. You have to pay for it. Have a town dinner and you all say, listen, you gotta pay for this. Everybody chip in because that's important for long-term economic viability and placemaking of your town. To say nothing of the fact that we're not allowed to have trees and everything. So we looked at that, but then we settled on this wider sidewalks scheme. And I've seen the plans that have angled parking. We did a parking analysis. I think we can pick up parking elsewhere where there's a deficit. We found when we did that plan that you all see laid out in the middle of the room, done by Vanessa there over 2 days in an amazing way. You only lose like 9 spaces between angled parking and your parallel parking by thinking creatively about some of the other side streets like tracks. And we'll show you what that looks like. But this is basically 2 lanes of travel, typical street, on-street parking, and a very wide sidewalk with street trees and amenity zone. And so here's that plan drawn up and colored. Here's Highway 16 at this end. Here's Travis Street as it rounds the corner to Main Street. And I will say from the get-go, we did a lot of sketching about this intersection. When I came to town for the first time, before I got a job here as a tourist, many years ago, I came to town with my wife and my kids. We're doing like a tour of movie places, right? Stranger Things. My wife wanted to go to see Vampire Diaries. So I've come here, not in a professional capacity, but as a tourist, and I said, I want to solve this problem. Because this is it's a nut to crack. And not just as a traffic problem, but as a public space problem. You don't have a town square, which is really interesting for as a peer town, right? Those of you who were at the kickoff back in May, I showed you all a grid of like 9 peer towns, all within an hour of your town, with your main streets, your city hall. So, we did a bunch of drawings here and went back and forth about what makes sense for turning radii and traffic stuff. This starts to look like it makes sense. It has legs. And part of the trick here, don't tell me, is a slight, which is how you start to regularize the intersection so that you don't have an 18-point bizarre thing in the middle of the street. This is going to be impossible for heavy trucks to get up to Main Street, which is both a reason to do it and also a challenge with your engineers and just your freight truck community. So you have to have some policies in place to figure that out. But I think that this starts to get you something, and then you pick up on-street parking on this side, and then other places along the street.
I got a question for you on that. Right where you're at. Did you ever consider, is there any reason why you couldn't actually make it a square like that? Yeah, it seems like a natural.
Yes. I drew a small square here, and it started to feel, the turning radii were very difficult. And then we started to enlarge it, but then making this right turn also was kind of tricky. And then you've also got the right of way for the railroad.
Yeah.
I think here's what I told Scott and others. We actually didn't set out to solve this problem on this trip, but we're coming back out in the spring, and this is one of the problems to solve. Not just here, not just this problem, but this problem. The problem you identified, which is there a public space play here that looks at this as a complete town square?
Well, the other issue is the elevation change. You come down the hill, and it's not easy, but that to me would always seem like a huge opportunity for Senoia.
Totally. And Travis Street also, I should point out, was also realigned. You don't get this clarity without moving this entrance over here, which seems like a no-brainer to do given you have a lot of space there. I mean, that lane is already pretty wide. So, I mean, I already walked through it, but look at the potential texture here. And remember, the purpose of this report is to put these ideas into some format that you can go out and get money and say, hey guys, we have a master plan that we all approved and we back, but we wanted to get money for it. So this is, this could be all about some sort of beautiful paper. It doesn't have to be. This is in West Palm Beach, Clematis Street, but this is a very similar condition. 2 lanes, on-street parking, and a sidewalk. Same thing here. So block by block, you can imagine something like this in your sidewalk area. And then finally this is actually from England. This is a very common sort of traffic calming and traffic approach in England called shared streets, where they don't really mark out a lot of what's happening on the ground. If anybody of you, anyway, I'm not gonna get into more cross control things, but it's very interesting and also curbless. So you can imagine this as a raised speed table that further slows people as they come into town. We did the same sort of exercise on Main Street, at least as it related to the street section, because I love Main Street as it is right now. But I think about my values already. I think here, your public space shouldn't be parking. That is a misallocation of that space. We'll find parking, but sidewalk space and space for people is invaluable. And you've already done such an amazing job creating that space. How can you continue to do more of that? This is an interesting model where you don't lose all the go into parallel, and you also pick up what would be a pretty interesting street type for your events on Main Street. So it goes back to can you make Main Street? Is Main Street a square, and how do you use it? This is in Lancaster, California. So, I think a pretty analogous example. They have more space. You can see they double loaded their parking in the middle and also still have on-street parking. And maybe there's variations of this, but they also close this street down repeatedly for events. And then this is like a sale. Food trucks in the middle of the street, lights hanging in the middle. And at the very least, we should consider and think about making those spaces parallel, at least in certain sections or even throughout. We'll do another drawing like that in the spring to stitch it all together and really talk numbers. All right, we're going from 150 spaces down to 96. Where are we going to pick up those other 50 spaces, or whatever the number is? And what is the value to you all for picking up that space? Do you need a 22-foot sidewalk in a amenity area? And how does that help you, especially on Main Street, do what you're already doing in front of New Normans, which is resolving the elevational differences and the ADA problems and the bizarre, I'm getting caught in a ramp to the Senoia Cafe, or all those weird elevation things. Could be something like this. So we did a quick photo sketch. This is Amalia from our team. I'm going to show you a lot of her work of what that might look like. And this was done just today. Turning the park in parallel, putting street trees regularly spaced, and just having your continuous wide sidewalk with beautiful planting. This is very heavily planted. I didn't tell you that when you were drawing this. I think this is probably too much, but it still gives you an idea. But where's everybody in the park?
So are you proposing to just do that on one side of the street?
No.
Because of the width, or?
No. It was just a function of the view. No, imagine on both sides. This is both sides. So we're looking up this way like that. So think about where are the other streets around town that we need to think about. Barnes, Bagley, right? Are there any other signature streets that we didn't get? There could be others. Yeah, John.
I think Highland Street coming up from the library from town had, I always felt very Savannah looking street, trees that come all the way across it. And the library feels very disconnected. It's also a place, you know, there's a big Memorial Day firework thing in town that Ursula does, and it's done there at the park. And so something that allows people to be parking downtown and come all the way down High Street, walking, go karting, bicycling.
John, you're getting ahead of the presentation. I'll get there. I'll get there. So here are your action plan projects. This is just what we could accomplish this week. And these are the things that were obvious. You all repeated them over and over, right? Thank you for teeing that up. So how do we get started? There's ordinance stuff. So that's council, right? Code for your snow streets. Come summertime next year-ish, when we deliver a code to council and to city staff, advocate for the code. This is important for you all, because it sets you up for the next 50 years. Establish some type of a citywide speed limit and enforce it. Everywhere around a certain district, you should not be going 30 miles an hour or anything close to that, right? And then thinking about your trucking routes and increasing dramatically the penalties for the trucks that come into town. You can tell them not to come into town, and also work with them on the size of the truck. This is happening in urban centers and towns all over. They can go to smaller vehicles, especially in these types of environments. There's no reason for them to be doing this. And hopefully some of the other design stuff that we're working on is even more of a stick to keep them out of some of these areas. Part of that is also like, can we think about signage, getting them from here out onto Howard, out onto the state highway rather than going into town? I mean, the police department is right here. They can be doing enforcement anytime, right? But that's a conversation with city staff and a program that you can establish, I think. So council and city staff. Okay, infrastructure, the initial things, these are all temporary-ish. That means, you know, they're not gonna go away after a year. If they're done properly, they'll last, but they're not your permanent fixes by any means. It just gets you to the next step. So the first is, that we heard over and over, it seems like an obvious one, is the crossing Keg Creek connection to Publix along CP Street. So council just made a great deal with you know, property owners back here to get a piece of land and start to connect that trail. Now you need to cross CV Street and get down to CV Street Park. That's number one. Number two is improve the Senoia Trail. That's actually the trail that goes down Rockaway and into Main Street. That's called the Senoia Trail. You wouldn't know that because there's no branding, there's no signage, there's no markings. It's just asphalt on the ground. What can we do to make that better? It's already there. And then finally, Island Street. What can we do on Island? This is all temporary, right? That's not your Savannah-like beautiful future vision yet. So, Keg Creek, and these drawings were done by Catalina on our team between yesterday and today. The first step, this is the Keg Creek Trail. This is towards Highway 85, and this is towards CV Street Park. Okay. The first thing is see if you can, working with developers who are now enlarging the road at this end of CB Street, take some of that asphalt and create one of those paths like you have in other locations around town. Right now, it looks like they were going to do 12-foot lanes. If we can take some of those 4 feet, keep the lanes 10 feet as they are, slow traffic. Take the 4 feet extra asphalt. We're going to pay for it and figure out how to put another 2 feet so you get a minimum 6-foot path and line it with a nice wooden railing. It's not a two-way golf cart path. It is not a solution for that, but it gets you somewhere if you don't want to be on CB Street way out here where people are taking that curve super fast. So the 3 components are trail markings, which we need to work out what those standards are, the physical separation itself, and then adding that space to the road. Because right now, this space does not exist. It's asphalt that needs to be added to the road. I would not ever advocate for enlarging a road, except for the purpose of providing some other type of pedestrian facility that would not be roadway. So here's what that looks like. These are also Amalia's renderings. This is the path. And here's what that looks like. short term. In the long term, we worked on a lot of different alignments. You've got drainage canals, drainage ditches, you've got power lines, sewer, you've got a lot of stuff happening, and trees. So what side of the street do you choose? We don't want people crossing over back and forth multiple times. So there's going to be a trade-off, there's going to be pain somewhere, either on this side or on this side. But let's take this temporary version, this version, which aligns with the path closer into town, provided it on this side. This is the south side of CV. Maybe some future version takes this space and makes it into a path, a formal path. That would require real money and real infrastructure. And you can see here, these are, cheaper chicken. They're not real infrastructure, but there's something that can be done. So what about the other side of the street? This is when you're coming out of Carrot Creek, that drainage ditch. It's tough to imagine putting something on top of there without spending a lot of money. So what does that look like with a boardwalk, where you allow the culvert to remain as it is, and you just use a different material and a different construction technique that would allow that to occur? You're going to run into utility poles and trees all over. So there's going to be pain for any of these things, right? Long term, there's no easy answer, but there's a way to do it, and it should be done because this is such an important connection. All right, so then what happens as we got to the park with our path, with our temporary path, what happens as we get closer to town? And here we're at Clark, we've passed the railroad, right? The road is opened up a little bit. You've got some marked parking already on one side of the road, but it's super ambiguous. And then you've just got that stripe on the other side. Formalize both. Formalize your protected path, which is still not a two-way condition. So you've got two folks coming, somebody's got to negotiate that. And the way that we handled that was to make this border not continuous. So that if people need to get around each other, that there was a practical way of doing that. You look each other in the face and say, okay, I'm here now. But use protection at the places that make sense. Here we're showing some continuous, planters. That's probably not as practical. But you've already got this section. There's nothing other to be done rather than putting in your system. I mean, you saw the presentation on Monday. For those of you who were here, my partner Mike Glenn talked about the way that regions brand their trail networks as an economic development and tourism approach, right? We talked about the Monon Trail, and I mentioned that in Indiana, the Indianapolis Trail. These are trails that lead to economic development. And so what does the name of that look like here? In Alpharetta, if you've been out to Alpharetta, they have the Alpharetta Loop, which is something that now realtors use in their advertisements for town, like be close to the Alpharetta Loop. So this is looking back towards the train tracks and back towards C Street. And it's the same parking that's already there. So the trade-off is like, okay, you can't do two-way travel, but you at least pick up parking on one side of the street and you've got your path on the other. And then long term, you pick up parking here and you put your trail off street, like in other places in around town, which would also require cutting down some trees and getting over the train tracks. Big problem. Okay, Main Street and Rockaway. This seems like one of the easiest also to do. Basically, as Main Street goes up on the bridge, where we're going into town this way, right? This is Old Rockaway as it peels off under the bridge. You're coming across here, or coming across here to get on the trail. This is wide enough, but you can take from your travel lane, make your travel lanes 10 feet, so that you can make this wide enough for two-way golf cart travel. Go from 8 to 12. And then do some of those trail crossings so that it's clear, right? You all seen the Peachtree City trail crossings. They're like red within the crosswalk. what is the standard? There's really not a standard, a national standard, a traffic standard. So we can create one, we're a little bit at liberty to figure out what that looks like. Green is a standard bike color. Okay, maybe that's obvious and it's very trafficky. It's not very historic, the red, I'll admit. It's more in the vibe of the town, but at least do some crosswalks, which you don't have right now, anything, and start to brand it and put trail markings. And long term, this was also another, big, hairy problem. The fact that you have to cross 2 times because of this gap. And there's no great solution other than like, you've got to negotiate some type of an easement in front of people's houses, and there's going to be trees that get lost, and something has to happen on that gap. This is not an ideal solution, crossing twice on this main entrance to your town. So here's what that looks like. Also, it's not a great look, right? Like, it's all faded, you've got a cracked sidewalk, and this doesn't feel safe at all. So you've got the wooden stake, border. We have to figure out what that looks like so that you have a consistent look around town. Something cute, something in the aesthetic of the town. But really, we're not doing anything here other than narrowing the lane and giving more space here and using pavement markings to indicate that this is a formal trail with all cars and people walking and biking. I'm not a fan of this yet, for obvious reasons. Just like you all, I get confused. Is that for me? Am I supposed to stop? I get tripped up every time. But maybe it's down here. I don't know. We'll figure that out. So, okay, as Main Street comes into town, okay, I got 10 minutes. Main Street coming into town at Couch Street. This is where the right-of-way opens up quite a bit. You've got those ambiguous